Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. Today I'm going to talk about my writing journey and kind of what I'm envisioning, what I'm working on, and where I want to go forward from here. Uh, I started out writing science fiction, and I've written science fiction since forever. But I started out writing a science fiction book meant to be the introduction to a trilogy, which is itself an introduction to a larger universe. And I've been working on that for some time. I'm finishing edits on it now, hopefully within the next couple of months, and then I'm gonna send it out to beta readers, go through that whole process, and begin moving towards publication. Originally, I wanted to do that as a traditionally published book, and I went through the whole process of trying to get an agent, etc., etc., and I learned a whole lot from it, and I've dramatically improved my craft. And went back through the book and re-edited it, which is what I'm doing now, because I realized it wasn't ready. But I also learned some other things about traditional publishing that kind of let me down. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but let's just say that Twitter doesn't do anyone any good, which is why I'm now off of it. Um, Traditional publishing can be really beneficial if you don't want to focus on doing everything yourself, hiring editors, hiring book cover artists, hiring, you know, audiobook people, etc., etc. However, if you traditionally publish, you give up a lot of your rights, a lot of your control, and some of your income. And it's the rights and control for me that are the biggest factor because I want to own my IP flat out. And the more I looked into it, and the more I saw things going on elsewhere in entertainment, the more I realized how important it is to own your IP. If you don't own it, you know, um, good example of one of the things that can happen. There's a major author for Star Wars who has not been paid by Disney the royalties that they're owed because Disney believes that since they bought the company that owned the rights, they didn't actually need to pay the guy. In other cases, your IP can be corrupted by various sources, studio execs, and so on. If you go through traditional publishing, you also have a lot of the publishing company will push for changes to the story and the characters in the book to fit, ideally to fit what they think sells. Seeing as how a lot of publishing companies are becoming political, that's kind of scary too. But ideally, they do it for what they believe sells the most, and that's fine. But for me, I want to write the story that I want to write, not necessarily the story that's going to sell the most copies. Not to say that I don't want to sell a lot of copies, because I do. But I don't want to make what I'll call corporate changes and reduce what I'm doing for the sake of more money. Put it that way. Uh, Not to say there's anything wrong with traditional publishing. If that's the route you want to go, it certainly fits for some people. But looking into it, I realized I wanted the control. I wanted total ownership of the IP. I didn't want a scenario where I am going to set up this trilogy and I'm going to set up this sci-fi universe and it's going to have a lot of books, and the publishing company does the first book and then they say, you know what, it didn't sell as much as we wanted it to. we're not interested in buying the second book. Because if they do that, now you can't write the second book. I did not want to have something I've worked on for so long, especially this setting, be completely undone because somebody else wanted it to sell more. So that's what has pushed me the hardest towards self-publishing. The other thing is control. It's not a quality issue. A lot of people think, oh, if you self-publish, it's because you're not good enough to be traditionally published, and that's just not true. A lot of people, myself included, just want the control and the ownership of the IP. So, I am hard at work on that book, and this is a tentative title here that will probably change, but this is actually it here. You can see it's at 108,000 words so far. Um, Not aiming to go any higher than that. It'll probably go a little bit higher, but it's down significantly from what it was before. I've really tightened the narrative and focused on the things that have mattered the most, and as well as just going through and getting rid of unnecessary wording and all that stuff. Um, so the next step, once that's done, is going to go out to beta readers. Once I get their feedback, I'll make those edits, and that's when I go and hire an editor, and hopefully one that does both line editing, which is where they edit the technical side, and narrative editing, where they say, hey, there's a problem here with the story, you should look at this. To me, I'm self-publishing, but I want it to be as tight and professional as I can possibly get it. Because so many books that are self-published are just kind of thrown out there. And that is not what I want. I want someone to look at it and not know if it was self-published or traditionally published. Because that's where I want the quality to be. So there will be professional editing, there will be professional covers, professional printing. Um, I've been kind of going back and forth on how to fund that because it's not cheap. Editors can run you a couple $1,000s. Book cover artists, less than that, I think, but still a lot. To say nothing about an audiobook, right? Um, I think I'm going to attempt crowdfunding when I get there. We'll see. We'll see where things are. Um, Still kind of working out how you would crowdfund a book versus how you crowdfund a comic book. So it's something I'm going to do some more research on. But in the meantime, I have already written the first draft of the second novel, and I have started the first draft of my fantasy novel that's going to be introduce a whole fantasy series. Um, this is what you're looking at here. I'm not going to go into any details on it, any like concrete details on it. Um, but it's about a character who is caught between extremes. Um, Everywhere he turns, he sees extremists. His father is an extremist. The country he lives in has been formed by extremists. The country that his kingdom neighbors is run by a different kind of extremists. To the north, there are barbarian tribes that are their own kind of extremist. To the south, there are other people who are extremists in another way. And he knows from history it wasn't always like this. And it's an analogy for a person now who is looking around, and what do you see? You see far leftists on one end and far right on the other, and that seems to be the only voices you hear. Um, and you feel kind of lost. That's the situation this guy's in with fantasy elements. Of course, it's not direct story; it's an allegory. Um, it's an allegory for how things don't do well when they're run to the extreme, and making really good progress on it so far. I don't know yet how long it's going to be. Certainly, it'll be longer than 108,000 words because it's an epic fantasy, not a sci-fi. And what has helped me a lot is this world building here, World Anvil. I'm not sponsored by them, so I'm not going to go into a long spiel, but very helpful program that lets me keep track of my world building. Now, I have said before, I don't do outlines, but I do know where things are going in terms of major plot points and where the story is going to end up. And I world build kind of hybrid like that. So I do the major elements of world building, and then as I go, I fill things in. Um, so that as I'm writing, I'll need a cultural idiom. And if I don't have one ready, I will come up with it, and then I'll connect that to something within the world, and that gives me something else to add to it, and so on and so forth. So by the time you get the first draft done, um, you have a whole bunch of little details filled in, and there you go. It it will be larger scope than anything I've done before, certainly. But it's part of my approach that I'm taking that I kind of got from Brandon Sanderson, who said that the if you're going to start and you're going to self-publish, you need to have a bunch of books ready to go, because self-publishing kind of requires building your name and thus getting a lot of books out. And rather than have one and focus on it and get it published and then start the next one, it helps if you have them ready to go. So as I'm wrapping final work on the first sci-fi book, I'm going to be editing and getting the second one out to beta readers. And then hopefully the fantasy ones will follow. So that's where I am. If you liked the video, hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.